5 to 10% of infantry soldiers actually shot at the enemy. They'd done archaeological digs at the battlefield of Gettysburg. They dug up all these rifles, and at first the archaeologists couldn't work it out. They're looking at these rifles, they're x-raying them, and they've got multiple bullets all up the barrel. And these are those old rifles you ever seen in the films where they get the gunpowder and they stick a ball in and ram it down. And what they worked out was that these guys, they were all in a formation in a noisy, smoky battlefield, and they were being told, you know, load, aim, and when they were being told to fire, they just weren't firing. And they could get away with it because it was so smoky and loud and they were going through the motions, but they were just reloading. During the First World War, there's loads of anecdotal evidence that soldiers even made pacts with each other to fire over the enemy's heads. They just decided, I'm not going to be involved in this killing. One of the reasons that British units were rotated around during the First World War, so the British Army actually said, no, this is good, we're resting our soldiers. We give them 2 weeks in the line, then we take them back to the base camp, and then we put them in the line somewhere else. What it was early in the war, when units were facing each other for prolonged periods, they started to form informal truces. They would meet in no man's land at night when they were fixing the wire and say, hey, look mate, we'll shoot at you for 10 minutes, you shoot at us, officers are happy. So this is a problem for the military. During the Second World War, only about 5 to 10% of infantry soldiers shot at the enemy. During the Vietnam War, they got that number up to 40 to 50%. And we're still talking about conscripts here. So this isn't about whether someone's a conscript or not. This is about something psychological that's happening to the soldier during training. During Iraq and Afghanistan, 95% of infantry soldiers will fire to kill, shoot to kill. So what is happening? And I've thought about this long and hard, and I still don't think I've got to the bottom of it, even though I went through the process. It's kind of hard to stand back and look at it and actually think what was going on. But anyone who's joined the military, hands up if you've been in the military. Who was taught the marksmanship principles? Do you remember it? Position and hold must be firm enough to support the weapon. The weapon must point naturally at the target. You remember it, right? So you're taught to fire, you're taught to shoot in a very formulaic way. And during that process, during that learning process, all of the thought, all of the concentration is on yourself. So the position and hold of the weapon must point naturally at the target. You're thinking about yourself, how you hold the weapon, and is it pointing at the target. And as you go through, and I won't bore you with the process, but it then moves on to breathing. How you breathe before you take the shot. Breathe out, hold your breath, release the shot. And again, it's all about yourself, what you are doing, your part in this process, not about the target. The target is actually called, who remembers this term? Aim at the centre of the mass. Aim at the centre of the mass. Anyone want to guess what that actually means? Shoot them in the chest. But this was never explicitly said, it was aim at the centre of the mass. The British infantry is taught to shoot at 300 metres. Why? Because the human looks like a little blob in the distance. When you're taught how to aim the rifle, you've got the, I forget all these military terms, I tried to demilitarise myself, so people go, he wasn't in the army, he doesn't know. The circle bit is lined up with the blade and lined up with the target, the human. And we were always taught to focus on the blade, the foresight blade. So you're focusing on the blade and not the object that you're actually shooting at. So these are sophisticated things. And I actually talked about this. I was talking to a hunter over in the United States a few years back. And I said, oh yeah, we went through this really kind of like, sort of like detailed, like prolonged training to learn how to shoot a rifle. I go, so how do you know, when you're out hunting, how do you do that? He goes, I just point it and kill it. But this is all about how we are training our soldiers to remove from them the barrier to kill. And there's a very interesting book on this by a guy called Lieutenant Colonel Grossman called On Killing, and it's a history of how the military learned how to do this. Part of it's through language. You know, I was in the parachute regiment. We never talked about, no one ever talked about killing anyone. We had a guy actually who was in a car crash and had some brain injury, and when he came back, he was different to us. He kind of been damaged out of that indoctrination, and he used to talk about how we would train killers, and everyone would look at him like he was crazy. I think he was the only sane one there, you know. So there's an avoidance, and I think you've all heard the term collateral damage. Collateral damage means killing civilians, right? But by using that term, you divorce divorce the action from the reality. You know, so this is all part of it. And an engagement with the fight or flight mechanism as an infantry soldier, as a paratrooper. Once we'd learned how to shoot these marksmanship principles, this was then taken a stage further, so that through a whole load of different training, we were reprogrammed to respond to, you could say, perceived threat, to respond to rifle fire with lethal force. So as soon as we heard rifle fire, we were straight away pointing in the rough direction of where it was coming from and firing back before going through the process of dash down, crawl, observe, sights, fire. See how all this stuff never goes. And this is mucking about with that back of the brain, the fight or flight mechanism. Has anyone ever approached a road, sort of maybe on the phone, you know, quite a modern thing, on the phone, not really looked at the road, and then as you step out, there's a car coming in, and you just freeze, don't you? Is it? Anyone ever done that? People have done that, mate, right? That's the fight or flight mechanism kicking in your brain. It's like, you're not even thinking. The front of your brain isn't going, oh look, there's a car. You know, it's just the back of your brain, the animal part, going, stop. Now, when we are faced with threat, oh really? Wow. When we're faced with threat, three things can happen. We can run, we can freeze, or we can fight. Now, most of us will do one of the first two things, run or freeze. Imagine if a lion come running through that door now. You know, we'd all be trying to run through there, or we'd just like freeze, pretend we're not there. But the military mucks around with that back of the brain, and so that we are responding with fight every time. And in fact, if a lion did come through that door, only about 1 or 2 in 100 people would actually try and fight the lion. They're psychopaths, right? It's not their fault. It's just their animal reaction. But the military is all about trying to create psychopaths out of all of us. So when Michael Gove, okay, so I'm going to move quickly on to the gang mentality. So when I joined the parachute regiment, it's the same in any unit. You want the soldiers to be loyal to the unit. You also want them to be to think that the unit is the most important thing in the world. And this is for a couple of reasons. So part of that is the uniform. Everyone wears a uniform. Part of that is the beret, the badges. And because you want the status, the perceived status of this, you'll go through anything. So you go through all these brutal punishments, you go through this process of learning to kill, because you want this status of being in this unit. Now this status is also used for other purposes. Because when I was in the military, we were taught to hate everybody. We were taught to hate anyone who wasn't in the parachute regiment. We called them crap hats. So they were looked down on, unmentioned, scum of the earth. We were taught to hate the RAF and the Navy. But the people we had the least amount of time for, the most despicable people in our society, were civvies. We had a word for them, civvy, C, U. I'm not going to finish it, you can work that one out yourself. That's what we used to call them. The lowest of the low. Now, if you think about it, all the rhetoric that comes out of the military and the politicians is how the British Army is there to protect us, to protect our society. But actually, the British Army hates us, absolutely hates every one of us. And you might be thinking, well, what is the purpose of this? Why would you get soldiers to hate all of their colleagues in the army and hate the civilians back home? Well, imagine if you've got soldiers who hate civilians in their own country. Where is that going to place civilians in a foreign country? So this is what military ethos is about: obeying, killing, and a gang loyalty. And this is what they're talking about when they're talking about pushing the military ethos into our schools. And I don't think there's a single person in this country, when exposed with that true nature of military ethos, who would think it's a good idea to have a whole generation of kids obeying orders without question. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to move on. When I eventually got to the battalion, I deployed on 7 operational tours. I was deployed to Northern Ireland, Macedonia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Not once did I ever see a uniformed enemy. Not once was I ever deployed against a uniformed enemy. The few occasions when Britain has deployed against uniformed enemies in the last 30, 40 years, you're looking at the Falkland War, Gulf War I, and the very early part of the Iraq invasion, where we were actually deployed against a uniformed enemy. So who were we deployed against? We were deployed against civilians. My job in Iraq was to... Now, this is another example of that sort of like ambiguity of language. I was told that my job in Iraq was to hunt down and capture dangerous, high-value targets who were involved in the insurgency. Sounds pretty glamorous, doesn't it? Sounds pretty important. Who are these high-value targets? Well, actually, I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's taken a long time for the indoctrination to wear away. But actually, when I explained what we were doing one thing. We were attacking civilians in their houses at night. That was what we were doing. I'm going to quickly explain my role in Iraq. I haven't got time to explain the bigger picture, but just my own involvement. So I was deployed to Baghdad 2005. Like I said, we were tasked with hunting down high-value targets. I want you to imagine now that you're in your own home, and it's midnight. It's dark, it's quiet, everyone's asleep, family all asleep in the different rooms, you know, mum next door, children down, you know, you get the picture, right? Whilst you're sleeping, there's 20 armed men. They've got rifles, pistols, machine guns, explosives, grenades, crowbars, and we're sneaking up to your house very quietly. And I get to your front door and I put a huge amount of explosives down that front door, blow it off, and the first thing you know about us being anywhere near your home is a huge explosion rocking through your house. It's still dark, your ears are ringing, there's dust everywhere. You can hear the men, they're in the house, they're coming up the stairs, they're banging open doors. You're being dragged out of your bed, your kids are being dragged out of their beds. Everyone's being separated out. Women and children into one room, men dragged into another room. You can hear the interrogations going on in a foreign language you can't quite work out. People are being slapped around. And whilst this is happening, my job at this point was to go around your house with a big, like a mail sack, and ransack your house. Everything out the drawers, all the cupboards open, beds turned upside down, passports, bank statements, money, mobile phones, anything of any importance to you, I'm taking. This is all of intelligence value to us. After about 20 minutes, we'd take all these bags out into the hallway. Any male of 16, whether we were looking for them or not, and on the whole, most of the buildings we went into, we didn't find who we were looking for. That didn't make any difference. They were hooded, cuffed, dragged out into the night. We left these houses with a huge hole where their front door used to be, all of their possessions gone, their house ransacked, and all of the males carted off for indefinite detention in one of Iraq's many torture centres at the time. That was my experience. That was my experience of the war in Iraq. Not very glamorous, not very heroic, and the government don't want you to know about things like that. How long have we got, mate? Right. That's the true nature of military service. When I left, I refused to carry on doing this job in Iraq. I left the military over this. I was a career soldier, but I just couldn't carry on doing this. It's a much longer story. Have a chat about it later if you want. But when I got out, because I'd read all these commando book comics, watched all these films, listened to all the stories that I thought were true, I thought that Iraq was an anomaly. This was something new that the British Army was doing, and how terrible it was, that our reputation had been sullied. Over the years, I started to meet veterans, all the way back to World War II, and they kept telling me the same story. Walter Heaton, joined the army in 1948, deployed to Malaya for 2 years to fight an insurgency. When I was growing up, I was told that this was a battle of hearts and minds, how we'd won over the civilian population. Walter Heaton told me, he was deployed there as an infantry soldier, that they would patrol into a village, drag all the people out of the village, burn the village down, destroy the food, and put them into a concentration camp. This is true. Now the British Army, again this use of language, called these concentration camps kampongs, which I think means village in Malay. And if you read the history, they said, yes, we relocated people into secure villages where we could guard them from the insurgents. In their mind, the village was, Nissen huts with a barbed wire fence around it. That looks more like a concentration camp to me. Some people, whilst Walter was out there, some people escaped these camps, went back to their former village. They sent a patrol of Scots Guards up there who massacred them. It's called the Batan Kali massacre. Those families are still looking for justice today. Anyway, I'm going to go on. I could go on. Every single conflict we fought in, we attack civilians, we intern people, we torture people, we kill people. And I will have that out with any soldier who wants to argue that, you know. So what we're going to finish on now is, and then I think we all need a bit of a break, is in the run-up to Armed Forces Day. Okay, we'll show the film then and ask maybe some questions. So, in the run-up to Armed Forces Day, we're working on a project with the artist Darren Cullen, who's a good mate of mine. Been working with him for 2 years. Some of you might have seen his work. He did a satirical anti-recruitment comic called Be the Meat. It's incredible. You've got to check it out online. So we decided to take his Action Man Battlefield Casualty dolls and make a series of satirical adverts about them and launch them in a run-up to Armed Forces Day. Because Armed Forces Day, like we've already talked about, is shown a very one-sided side of military life. Now, Action Man, if we think about Action Man, he's a doll, he's got the uniform, he's got the equipment, you know, and all the adverts I remember, you know, Action Man going into war. But we never see the possible outcomes of what might happen to Action Man. So we've made these videos. I'm going to show it now. We'll have a time for discussion maybe about the videos later. We're going to show them again. So here we go. But these, you know, I'm going to warn you now. These are fairly hard-hitting videos. Where's that gone? Sorry. Oh, that's a good